Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are recording.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good evening, everyone. Call the meeting to order of our Committee of the Whole for today, May 17th. Councillor Leach sends her regrets be a bit of an hour late and seek someone, any late additions or deletions for the agenda.
None, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Someone please move that the agenda of the whole Committee of the Whole be adopted. Councillor Wiebe, second. Councillor Hopful, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Item 3.1. I need someone to move that the March 23rd, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes be adopted as presented. Who will so move? Councillor Howe. Second, Councillor Hopful. Any errors or omissions? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried, and thank you. We'll move to item 5.1, zoning bylaw amendment to permit mobile food trucks. Mr. Taylor, will you please share with us a statement that you have in this regard before we begin discussion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a statement from someone who will be affected by this. Dear Mayor Bussey and Council, my name is Stepha Lord, and I have submitted the statement to address my planned food truck business and the bylaw amendments that would be required in order for me to launch said business on my property on Main Street. I understand that town staff have prepared recommendations to Council on this matter, but rather than Council making a decision based on those recommendations, I am requesting that Council not rescind its previous resolution and instead continue to require staff to proceed with the bylaw amendment process, thereby allowing it to go to public hearing. I thank you for your consideration in this matter and your time today. Sincerely, Stepha Lord.
Thank you. We'll now move on. Mr.
Thank
Taylor.
you, Mr. Mayor. So staff have had this resolution from Council from 2019 as follows: that Council directs staff to prepare the appropriate zoning bylaw amendment required to permit mobile food trucks to operate in Lillooet, and that Council directs staff to prepare the appropriate business license and regulation bylaw amendments required to permit mobile food trucks to operate separately from a street market, and that Council directs staff to create a policy governing the operation of mobile food trucks on district property, and that Council directs staff to create application and permit documents authorizing mobile food trucks to operate on district property. With COVID-19 happening in 2000, staff were triaging many of our applications, and with many of the regulations in place, this zoning amendment did not make it into the 2020 work plan. It has come up again in 2021, and now staff are assessing the direction based on the current situation. So with the ongoing effects of COVID-19 straining both the completion of the municipal strategic objectives and the local food service economy, staff are recommending that food trucks not be considered for inclusion as a permitted use within the zoning bylaw outside of the permitted use at the farmers market. Where outdoor dining is appropriate with current restrictions, adding an additional permitted food use will dilute the market for those businesses that have continued to operate over the last year and a half without two tourism seasons, which generally sustain these businesses throughout the winter. Further, it is not in the best economic interest of the community to permit a new retail food use that does not renovate or otherwise improve upon existing commercially taxable structures in the downtown core. Staff are recommending that the discussion regarding food trucks be postponed until either the zoning bylaw is reviewed or during the downtown planning process in 2022, when the established food service industry has had a chance to recover. The staff recommendation is that Council rescind Resolution 166/2019 in its entirety. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any comments, questions from Council? Councillor Howe?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. I know that there are a few people in town, so a few community residents who would like to participate in offering food trucks. And it does give them a jumping ground, an opportunity to potentially move into those brick and mortar buildings for food commerce. And I'd like to see that happen for them. I do understand what you're saying, and I'd hate to see further stress placed on our existing brick and mortar businesses, especially right now in a time of COVID when they have experienced little, very little revenue through the visitation season. But I'm curious, is there something we can, outside of 1 day a week at the farmers market, is there anything we can do to provide an opportunity for local residents who want to do food truck option? I know Steffa, Miss Lord had mentioned on her property. So that's interesting. I'd be open to talking about what that may or may not look like. I understand we would push it out a year, but I'd like to talk about options now, just to see if we might be able to come up with something, being that we are currently in a committee of the whole for this anyway.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. Councillor Howe, Mr. Taylor, or shall I wait and hear more comments from other councillors?
I'm not sure if there was a question directed at staff in that one. I think that was more of a conversation jump off. Okay,
good. Then Councillor Hopeful, you're next, and Councillor Wiebe after.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I am open to conversation about this too. So one question I have, Mr. Taylor, is this for all properties, or if somebody has a private property, like say, let's just say the brewery, it's on a private property, could they bring their own truck in there and operate it, or is it inclusive of all?
So the breweries are permitted to have a food service associated with them. So we did talk about this specific to the brewery, and they would be permitted to have a food truck so long as that food truck was only to serve the patrons of the brewery and not not members of the public just walking past the property. So they have to already be using the brewery as they would for if the brewery did have a commercial kitchen with a restaurant seating area. So it's still providing food service as part of an improvement on a property, not just a food truck independent of any other improvement on the land.
Okay, so aside from the brewery, then if we're talking about the Victoria Hotel and a food truck was to be in their parking lot and serving anybody per se, that would not be allowed. But if they were serving just patrons of the Victoria Hotel, then that would be allowed, correct?
I'd have to look a little more into that one. I believe there's some more specific uses around the hotel use that speak specifically to a restaurant.
Okay, and I just want to say that I think it should be open to conversation, because most, I'm not saying all, I'm just saying most restaurants are closed by 8 o'clock. And after that, it would be nice if we had some sort of options, even if it was a food truck. But so I am open to a conversation with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoppel. Councillor Wiebe?
Yes, I would like to see us finish what we started in the food truck realm here. Nobody perceived that we'd go into COVID for a second year. I am against rescinding this and would really like to see it go to public hearing as well. I'm thinking it would be great to have an ice cream truck or a French fry truck or whatever down by the park or wherever. So yeah, I would like to see it go to public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Any more discussions, questions? Councillor Howe?
Thank you, through the mayor. So is there a way to allow for local residents to partake in a food truck option? Or if if we create a policy around this, is that open for any community to have a food truck set up in our district?
Well, it wouldn't be open season. I believe the policy that was drafted back in 2019 did set up some specific areas that through the permitting process, it was limited. It wasn't just anyone could come in and set up on the street. It did also allow for food trucks to be located on private property within the C1 zone. But if it is added to the zoning bylaw as a permitted use on private property, and then that use is started, it is allowed to continue, it is permitted to continue. And food trucks don't count as an improvement on the land, so it wouldn't increase any of the commercial property tax from that property.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments?
Actually, Councillor Howe, did I answer your question completely? It looked like I might not have.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. That was answered. Thank you.
The feeling that I'm getting is that we're looking to refer to staff with other options. Public hearing, I hear one. What do the other two councillors say? Councillor Howe?
I'd be open to a public hearing on this, definitely. I mean, when staff has, created their draft policy and, council's had a chance to look it over, I would like to see what the rest of the community thinks of this idea, especially stakeholders. So other restaurant and cafe owners, how they feel about this. It'd be good to hear from them. Thank you.
Okay. And rather than tabling this, Councillor Hopful, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree. I don't want the policy as written to be rescinded at this time.
Okay. From my perspective, if we have a public hearing, I think it's pretty much a bit of a no-brainer. The people that have the brick and mortar facilities obviously are struggling right now, and we should be supporting them versus looking at mobile food trucks. But I think you bring up good points in terms of the availability of places to go after 8 p.m. and the like. I can understand that as well. I do feel strongly that we should take extra precautions to protect our present tax-paying commercial entities. That's what concerns me the most. And that's why I'm almost in favor. I'm not almost, I would be in favor of rescinding this and looking at it again once COVID is over. However, I'm at the pleasure of council. Mr. Taylor, how would we do this? I'm not going to table this motion and we send this back to staff for further consideration.
It would be better if it were just defeated, if that's the wish, because it's easier to put that in the minutes.
Got it. Understood. Okay, thank you. I need someone to move that council rescind resolution 166/2019 in its entirety. Who will move? Okay, I'll move it. Now I'm looking for a seconder. No one seconds it. So therefore it stays. Guys? That's it, Mr. Taylor?
No, it's just died. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to 5.2, permissive tax exemption policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the permissive tax exemption policy was at the request of council after the PTE consideration last year, where council expressed a desire to have a more robust methodology for really assessing these permissive tax exemptions. The permissive, some of the requests of council were that no more PTEs be considered along Main Street between Park Drive and Lake Road. Council also noted that the PTE policy should be reconfigured to encourage organizations that have subject properties with lands or buildings that are vacant and underutilized to take action to use the properties to benefit Lillooet residents through delivery of programs and services. Council also asked that a decision matrix be formed so that it can be a little more quantitative in deciding how much and to whom these permissive tax exemptions are given, which takes away a little bit of the discretion of it if you follow the matrix to the letter. Council also stated the factors used by council to consider the applications should be transparent and known to the organizations that apply annually to the permissive tax exemption. So corporate services staff have done up a fairly robust permissive tax exemption policy for your consideration, along with a application form on our new application form template and a matrix for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions, comments from council? Councillor Wiebe?
Yes, through the mayor. I'm confused, but not confused. So on section 6, duration of exemption, the first paragraph where it says tax exemptions under section 224 will be applied every 1 year. Do I have to read the whole thing? Okay, I'm curious as to what we call an off cycle, and I'm just curious on that whole one statement. I'm a little confused on that. Like if we're doing it annually, what does that exactly mean? Is that like municipal properties or? Yeah, I'm just curious.
Sure, I'm actually going to ask Kimberly G to pipe in for this one if she wouldn't mind.
Pardon me. Can everyone hear me okay and see me?
Yeah.
Good evening, council, staff, and members of the public. With respect to the permissive tax exemption policies implemented by municipalities, we're finding that most of them opt for a longer than an annual cycle. So, for example, a 3-year or 4-year cycle, they will approve folks who apply for longer than 1 year. My understanding is council is more apt to choose for an annual review. And by mentioning an off cycle, this gives some discretion to make an adjustment. So in a particular year, perhaps you may want to embrace a longer term cycle in which we would call it an off cycle. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wiebe?
Well, it does. I'm just not sure that I'm comfortable with it because it kind of leaves one council making decisions for future councils if we run into crossing. But yes, that does. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. G. Thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Any other questions, comments from council? Councillor Howe?
Hi, yes, thank you. Okay, through the mayor. When we're talking about, well, when we're looking at the checklist, number 5, 6, and 7 come up as I have questions about them, and number 8, I think we should remove altogether. And the reason I say that is because some of them almost seem hearsay unless we plan to have these conversations through a committee of the whole or a closed meeting. I'm not sure which way it would go in terms of these, in terms of the permissive tax requests. And then before making a final decision, any questions that we may have, that we then write the organization and receive with our concerns for clarification purposes before just docking a mark. So, for example, number 5, should council have any concerns about any major changes to the organization's objectives or programs? I mean, we talk a lot about a lot of different things, and you know, information goes through this community quite quickly, both you know, clear communication and maybe not so clear communication. So I think giving the opportunity and writing in as a part of the policy that we check back for clarification on any questions that we have before docking the mark would be important.
Okay,
What say council?
any further comments? Councillor Hoffel?
Thank you. So my issue is more with the churches. I just don't think that the churches should have to apply. And if they do have to apply, I would like to see them apply perhaps as a group, because I think it would be very hard to differentiate and accept one church and deny another church without putting us in a very awkward place. I would like to see either the churches be exempt to applying altogether or apply as one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoffel. Lots of ideas, lots of queries. Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you. Just to build off of that, the purpose that staff understood from council for drafting this policy, as well as this matrix, was to be able to consider each property, regardless of the use on it, independent of each other, so that staff would go and actually look at each property that applied for and give council an idea of what parts of that land were actually being used for the community benefit and which parts might be underutilized. So if there is a church on a just for the sake of it, on a 5-acre parcel, but the church only was over 2,000 square feet of it, then staff would come back and say that there's a good portion of this land being underutilized that could potentially be used for either subdivision of residences or some sort of affordable housing. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that will work with churches on their underutilized lands to build affordable housing. So I don't think it's that if one gets it, they should all get it. They're all welcome to apply, and I believe they would all qualify, but each piece of land and the improvements on it should be looked at individually.
Thank you. Councillor Hoffel.
But I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think when we were actually discussing, oh my God, there's a fly in here. It keeps landing on my head. I think when we were discussing it, there was actually only one property, one tax exempted property that actually fit that criteria, that had extra land beside it. So that's why I kind of had an issue with it back then when we had voted on it, but I don't know. That's just my opinion. I don't want to choose between churches, and I think, again, I don't think we should be, I don't think they should have to apply. It's just my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. I'm curious, this question's for Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, in other communities, when it comes to churches, is there any question about the permissive tax exemption for churches, or is it always 100% across the board? They are simply included because of the type of organization that they are?
I will give my answer and then ask Kimberly to fill in any gaps that I may miss. She did the research, but these tax exemptions are completely discretionary. So I don't believe that it's fair to say that because one community does it or 5 communities do it, therefore Lillooet is bound to do it. It is a completely discretionary authority of council on when to issue these permissive exemptions. That being said, Kimberly, did you come across anything specific to places of worship in your research?
If I may jump in, I just want to remind council as well that permissive tax exemptions are different than statutory exemptions. So statutory exemptions for places like schools and the actual building that's used for a place of worship are automatically exempt. The permissive ones are only for the lands surrounding it.
Yeah, before I go to Councillor Wiebe, I like this approach, and I feel that for every application, the more information that we do have, it is discretionary other than what Mr. Dennegar just highlighted, and that the more information we as council have, we have to deal with it and we can make our decision based on that. Councillor Wiebe.
Yes, I like this approach as well. I think when we first put it on the table and asked for staff to bring this back, it was so that we could get away from the 100% tax exemption for the places that presently get it, plus future places. So I like this idea that we can say, well, we'll give them a portion, and next year if something changes in the programming or the funding or their capabilities, then we can look at it again. So I'm all for this. I think it's great.
Any further discussion? Councillor Howe, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just one more question through the mayor to Mr. Taylor. The permissive tax exemption worksheet, the heading exempt in previous year. I think it's a check, yes or no. I'm just curious if we're starting this new process, would this particular question still apply? Would it make any difference at all, really?
Well, I mean, it is just asking if they've received permissive tax exemption before, and then we can find the records that have related to that. So it's more just an information gathering exercise, not so much a qualification.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Any more queries, questions? Okay, folks, good discussion, a lot of good work here, and a lot more information available for the next time we need to make decisions. And as I said, I'll repeat myself, I think with this type of information, we're able to deal more effectively in our decision-making process for each application that comes forward. I need someone to move that the draft permissive tax exemption policy CO.05C be received and forwarded to council for consideration. Who will so move? Councillor Wiebe, second Councillor Howe. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed? It's carried. Thank you, folks. Thank you, staff. That was a lot of good work. Okay, we'll move on to item 6.1. Building Bylaw 2021-006, building fees and building forms. Another update from 2003 and a lot of extremely detailed and good work inside this this proposal to us. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you all see building in Lillooet? Sorry, can everyone see that? Excellent, thank you. Come on. So the District of Lillooet's current building bylaw has not been substantially updated since 2003. The only record of amendment to this bylaw was early 2004 that changed the fee structure. With the enactment of the Building Act and new requirements for professional qualifications, a full review of the building bylaw was determined appropriate and should have been done by December 15, 2017. The building bylaw fits into the district's regulatory framework into the standards and procedures category, or the detailed instructions for completing specific tasks and actions in regulatory bylaws and operating policies and procedures. The purpose of the bylaw is to ensure that every application is treated fairly by requiring the same information and following the same process for every application type, to enforce the provisions of the BC Building Code, Plumbing Code, Fire Code, and any other applicable provincial enactments or district bylaws, and as a covenant with community members, both current and future, that the district will, to the best of our ability, ensure that construction is done with fire and life safety in mind. This helps to build a confidence with prospective new residents that if a structure was inspected by the district, that we made every reasonable effort to ensure that it was constructed to the provincial standards. The building bylaw outlines the application process to make it as clear as possible what an applicant needs to provide and what they can expect the ongoing responsibilities will be to ensure a smooth progression through the process. To ensure that applicants follow all necessary steps to comply with municipal bylaws, the BC Building and Fire Codes, and other safety regulations, all construction must receive appropriate permits through Development Services and Public Works when required. Once any necessary permits are issued, the building official can undertake the appropriate inspections of the development to confirm full compliance. This bylaw was taken from the model building bylaw created by the Municipal Insurance Association of BC. The MIABC model bylaws are created specifically with liability mitigation in mind and in an attempt to get municipalities to adopt a more standardized model. Standardizing was also a component of what the Building Act was attempting to achieve by requiring that municipalities not add their own building provisions into the building bylaws. If council is going to adopt a building bylaw, then we must follow the standardized BC Building Code, which has its own provisions for unique situations that require alternative solutions. This model bylaw was developed with the Building Act in mind and meets the requirements of the Act. Further, staff are not recommending becoming early adopters of additional step code steps at this time. I would also like to assure council that this bylaw is not about putting new regulatory hurdles or red tape in the way of construction. This is to clarify process and language, meet the legislative requirements that we missed in 2017, and providing builders with the clear direction they need to go from application to occupancy. Building permits ensure that fire and life safety issues are dealt with by builders. Building permits are also our method as to trigger points for other building requirements, such as when water is turned on or whether or not development permit requirements are being met. A simplified version of the application process is as follows. Applicants should refer to all applicable enactments, codes, and bylaws before drawing up plans to ensure that they meet the requirements. The district reviews the submitted plans for compliance with the aforementioned regulations. Any deficiencies should be addressed and resubmitted, at which point the district will issue a permit. Building plans are one of the areas that we find create the greatest delay. Many plans do not have sufficient information to show code compliance. Many builders have also asked us to accept built to BC Building Code annotated on the plans. However, more often than not, this results in the building official needing to have work stopped, removed, and replaced as the proper construction method or materials were not detailed on the plans. Requiring this information up front does save time. In order to better assist developers with the requirements for construction, staff have developed a battery of new application forms. The current form on your left provides very little in the way of direction for application materials. The new form, which does have 2 additional pages, collects all of the required information needed to open a file, and if filled out completely, answers many follow-up questions that can delay the process if we have to chase for those answers. The district records on plumbing applications is often scattered as the existing building permit form did not collect sufficient information on the works being applied for. Having accurate records on plumbing is extremely important, as much property damage and life safety can be related to plumbing. And private plumbing infrastructure interfaces directly with the municipal system. To protect the district from both property damage liability and ensuring that the community infrastructure is protected from both damage and health concerns, plumbing permit applicants will be required to complete this form in their entirety so that the district has a full and complete record of the approved works. One thing that we have been hearing from applicants is that they are not always aware of inspections that are required and when to call for them. To address this, we have created a building permit inspection worksheet. This is not an application form, but rather a tool for applicants to keep on their files and be able to track their own inspections to make sure that they don't miss anything. As it is brought to my attention that it might not be reasonable to ask people to read a 50-page bylaw every time they need to see if they need an inspection. We have also created resource checklists for those wanting to apply for building permits. Building permits are complex creatures, and the province, who I am happy to blame for everything and anything, doesn't necessarily have the best track record in updating the building community on new changes that often have a substantial impact on building costs. For those of you who haven't met him, I do have our Building Official Association of BC Level 3 certified building official, Richard Diamond, in the office. Who is far more eloquent at explaining the rationale behind the building code and inspection requirements to answer your questions. Further, I have included bylaw 2021-019, a bylaw to amend the fees and charges bylaw with the schedule of proposed fees. I won't go through all of them right now, but staff are proposing that the permit fees for the issuance of a building permit be increased from 0.5% to 0.65% in order to bring us more in line with other regional jurisdictions, as these fees have not been reviewed in 17 years. Thank you, and I'll take any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good presentation. I really like the idea of the checklists, and they're very detailed enough that at least in a good form, we're assisting all the applicants to know where they would need to go without having to guess. So therefore, thank you. Councillor Wiebe, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I didn't know so much was involved in building. I have 2 questions, actually. I'm wondering if we built a house in Calgary, and I know that's totally different, but we had a contractor and this, that, and the other. So if someone from out of town is building a house in Lillooet and has a contractor looking after things, and somewhere there's an oversight, because I read in there somewhere about how if the proper permit isn't purchased or whichever, anyway, that things can need to be opened up again, like your wiring and your plumbing and this, that, and the other. So when you're dealing with something like that, does the request for what your updates would be go directly to the contractor, or do they go to the contractor and the person building or the owner?
Based on the new application forms, the standard would be if I do an on-site inspection, that information is being passed on in paper form currently to either the contractor or owner, and we record who it goes to. If we in the future move to more of an electronic system, that would be emailed. When there's issues or emails or communications other than the inspections, those are done to the owner and the authorized agent. And if there's a designer, engineer, or architect, or any professionals involved, they would be included in the loop as well.
Okay, thank you. We had run into some problems when we were building our house, and I was amazed at how ridiculous some of them were. But anyway, my other one is, I know of someone who's building right at the moment, and they're requested to get a seismic, or I'm going to say some kind of a seismic geological study or something. Is that because of the area we're in? I know they do a lot of that in the SLRD. I'm just curious about Lillooet.
You'll find in the SLRD in many jurisdictions, it's an automatic request. Here we have a little more leeway in that we do not have very high snow loads. So if the design is appropriate for our snow loads and so forth, and you don't require a structural engineer, the ground is good, there's no evidence of fill or steep banks or water or things like that, other sort of hazards that are obvious, and that can include rockfall from above, then you probably won't need a geotechnical engineer. Typically houses now require structural engineers because of their design. And once that happens, the structural engineers are required to rely on a geotechnical engineer's report. And that's governed by both the building code and the APEC, the Association of Professional Engineers in BC.
Okay, thank you. It was actually, I'm going to say it was a really interesting read. I read the whole thing this afternoon.
Yes, there's some interesting geological history here.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Thank you, Mr. Diamond. Welcome, Councillor Leach. Councillor Hoffel, go ahead.
Yes, through the mayor. So I'm just wondering, on page 32, it said right at the bottom, fourth paragraph from the bottom there, it said, in order not to shock the development community, a gradual increase over the next 5 to 8 years is more appropriate. And then a little bit down, it says the more realistic proposal is to increase from 0.5 to 0.65 and reevaluate the fees in approximately 2 years. And then it says the new fee under 0.65 would be $3,021. So I was a little confused, and I just needed some clarification on what exactly we are increasing per year. And is it over 5 to 8 years, or is this just for the next 2 years and then we're going to reevaluate, or how does that work?
So this is all a suggestion, not something that I'm suggesting council tie itself into. What staff are proposing right now are to go from the 0.5 to the 0.65 with a suggested another reevaluation in 2 years, but nothing in the bylaw that is locking you into that. Over the next 5 to 8 years was just a suggestion of mine to maybe look at that of being a time frame to be up to potentially the 1%. But if council feels in 2 years when we go to reassess it that 0.65 is still enough, then we will leave it at that. So there's nothing that you're committing to as part of this bylaw with regards to the fees. And under council direction anyways, we have been asked to continually be looking at our fees and reassessing them anyways. So this would just fall under that process.
Okay, and can I ask, do you feel that these are higher, being that if Lillooet was up to around 3,000 or just over 3,000, I know Pemberton and Summerland I see are higher, but do you think that's a reasonable amount?
I do. Now you'll notice that Kamloops is actually quite a bit lower at excuse me at $2,550 for a $435,000 home. That is because they have the population to be able to spread that burden out a little more over the taxpayers. So the reasoning behind this was to really adopt the user pay system. And all of the fees were looked at through that lens of not not spreading out too much burden onto the taxpayers for staff time and other things that come out of the budget.
And if I may, lastly, through the mayor, can I just ask you or Mr. Diamond, like, do you think that, because we're really trying to promote building houses and coming to Lillooet, do you think that would be a deterrent? I mean, it's not a whole lot, but in the scheme of things, when you add in the cost of wood and how much lumber is going up, like, I mean, it all adds up together. Do you think that would be a deterrent in choosing Lillooet to buy and build?
I think if people are going to build, they're going to build. I don't think a few $1,000s onto a permit fee is going to make a difference. Being able to raise these fees is going to be able to help to also pay for the additional building inspection time that has been approved in the last budget. And there's also fees in there that allow the building inspector to spend some more time helping those individuals who may not have access to a building code professional. So you will notice in there that we do have an hourly rate for replan reviews, but that usually comes after we do a first plan assessment and mark down the deficiencies and let them know what the next steps are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoppel. Any further comments, questions? Councillor Howe?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question's for staff and potentially Richard himself. When we are talking about the building code, is it specifically just the structure or is it the land as well?
The building code mostly applies to the building. The simplest way to visualize it typically, and this is more in residential, is it kind of stops 4 feet from the building because we need access. And then for the services like sewer and water, perhaps storm drainage, they may project out further from the building to the property line. But it's generally the building. And when we go to commercial, it starts to change a little bit. And we have things like fire access, excuse me, accessibility for parking requirements, for actually accessing the building from the parking area and these sorts of things. So in general, it's the building, but it does have a little bit of spread to it. It's the other provincial enactments in the zoning bylaw that will apply in the OCP more to the lands themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Howe. Any further comments, questions, queries? Good discussion, council. Good information, staff. I'd like someone to move that number 1, the building bylaw number 2021-006 be forwarded to council. Who will move? Councillor Wiebe, second Councillor Howe. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Carried. Now would like someone to move that fees and charges bylaw number 2021-003, amending bylaw number 1, bylaw number 2021-019 be forwarded to council. Who will move? Councillor Wiebe, second Councillor Hoppel. Call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. Good hard work. Nice information. Okay. We'll move to item 7.1. I need someone to move that the May 17th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting rise and report. Who will so move? Councillor Howe, second Councillor Hoppel. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. We'll see you for the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you all. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council.